The night he wasn't supposed to return, the Vampire King was not meant to return before midnight. The castle overlooking the dark cliffs of Black Hollow was quiet, wrapped in silver moonlight and silence. For centuries, King Adrian Valerius had ruled with cold precision, feared by nobles and enemies alike. He was immortal, powerful, and emotionally unreachable. The servants trembled when he passed, and even the ancient council measured their words carefully around him. That night, however, something unusual stirred in the air. Adrian dismissed his guards early after cutting short a political gathering with rival vampire lords. A strange instinct pulled him home hours before anyone expected him. He entered through the grand obsidian doors without announcement. The castle corridors were dim, candlelit, peaceful, until a small, trembling hand grabbed his sleeve. It was Alara, the youngest maid in the castle. She was human, frail, quiet, and often overlooked. She had come to the castle 2 years earlier, after her village was destroyed in a border raid. The nobles mocked her patched dresses and soft voice. The head steward treated her as invisible. Yet she worked harder than anyone, never complaining, never demanding attention. Now she stood before the most feared being in the kingdom, her wide hazel eyes filled with panic. Instead of bowing, instead of stepping aside, she pressed a finger to her lips and whispered, "Stay silent." The words shocked him. No one commanded a king, especially not a human servant. His crimson eyes narrowed, but he sensed something deeper than disrespect: fear, urgency, protection. Adrian lowered his voice. "Why?" Alara swallowed, her hands shaking. "Please, if you value your life, do not walk into the throne chamber." For the first time in centuries, the Vampire King felt curiosity stronger than anger. He moved soundlessly with her toward a hidden servants' corridor. Through a narrow stone vent, he looked into his own throne hall. What he saw made the ancient predator within him freeze. 2 council members stood beside the ceremonial chalice used during the binding ritual of Maid, sacred event scheduled for the next week. And beside them stood Lord Malric, Adrian's most trusted general. They were pouring a pale liquid into the silver goblet meant for him. "White ashroot," Alara whispered. "It doesn't kill vampires. It paralyzes them forever." Adrian's undead heart hardened. Betrayal did not wound him, but calculated treason within his own walls was unacceptable. He glanced at the trembling girl beside him. "How did you know?" "I clean the council chambers," she said softly. "They thought I couldn't understand ancient dialects, but my grandmother taught me. I heard them planning." Tears welled in her eyes. "They said once you are frozen in stone, they will divide your kingdom." Adrian studied her face carefully. She could have remained silent. She could have escaped and saved herself. Instead, she risked execution to warn him. A human girl with no power had just protected an immortal king. "Why help me?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "Because when my mother was ill last winter, you granted me leave without punishment. You remembered I was human." To Adrian, it had been a trivial order. To her, it was mercy. A slow, dangerous calm settled over him. "They want a ceremony," he murmured. "Then we shall give them one." He stepped away from the vent and straightened his black coat. "Go to your quarters. Say nothing. Tomorrow you will serve the chalice." Alara's breath caught. "Me?" "Yes, and you will follow my instructions exactly." As she hurried away, Adrian entered the throne chamber loudly this time. The conspirators immediately straightened, masking guilt behind false loyalty. "My lord," Malric said smoothly. Bowing, Adrian offered a cold smile. "Preparing for the ritual, I see." "Only ensuring perfection," one council member replied. "Excellent," Adrian said calmly. "I do admire dedication." The game had begun. But what neither the traders nor even Adrian fully understood was this: the night's betrayal was only the first test. Because outside the castle walls, forces far older than the council had already begun watching. And a simple human maid had just changed the fate of the vampire throne forever. Asterisk began the next morning with the castle acting normal on the surface. Yet every stone hallway felt like it was hiding a knife. Elara tried to keep her head down as she scrubbed marble floors, but the head steward, Madame Vena, noticed her shaking hands and took it as weakness. In front of other servants, Vena mocked her torn gloves, called her a stray human, and accused her of stealing silver because she had been near the council chambers the previous night. 2 older maids joined the bullying, laughing that a poor village girl should be grateful to breathe the same air as vampires. Elara's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she didn't fight back because in this castle, humans who spoke too loudly vanished without questions. She forced herself to keep working, swallowing the pain, and that quiet endurance was exactly what made her different. When the steward slapped a wet rag from Elara's hands and ordered her to kneel and clean the floor again, properly, Elara obeyed, even though her wrists ached, because she had learned the hardest survival lesson of all: sometimes dignity is protected by patience. What Vena didn't see was King Adrian standing in the shadowed archway at the end of the hall, listening without moving. The entire staff had feared his presence for centuries, yet he did not interrupt or punish anyone immediately. He simply watched Elara's face as she lowered her eyes and endured the cruelty without hatred, and something unfamiliar stirred behind his cold control. Adrian was used to fear, begging, flattery, and lies. He was not used to quiet strength from someone with nothing. That afternoon, Adrian summoned Elara to the private library, a forbidden room of ancient books bound in black leather and sealed by runes. She arrived trembling, sure she was about to be executed for touching his sleeve the night before. But instead she found Adrian alone, seated at a table covered in council records, old maps, and a single silver goblet identical to the ritual chalice. His voice was calm, yet the air around him carried command. He asked her to repeat what she had heard, word for word, in the ancient dialect. Elara hesitated, then spoke the phrases exactly as the conspirators had said them. And Adrian's eyes sharpened, because her pronunciation was flawless. Too perfect for a servant who was just human. He tested her again by opening a dusty scroll written in a dead royal language, then watched as Elara read a line softly, without realizing she was proving herself. Adrian didn't praise her. He simply observed, and that silence felt heavier than any compliment. "You are educated," he said. Elara shook her head quickly and explained her grandmother had been a healer who collected old prayers and lost tongues, because knowledge was the only weapon poor people could pass down when they had no gold. The explanation struck Adrian harder than he expected. Vampire nobility boasted about bloodline superiority, yet this human family had fought to survive through learning and resilience. Adrian leaned forward, his tone lowering. "If Malric and the council succeed, they will freeze me into stone and rule through fear. If I stop them openly now, they will claim I have gone mad, and the other lords will swarm my borders like wolves. So we will do this cleanly." He slid the goblet closer. "You will serve the chalice on the ritual night. Before that, you'll learn what to look for, what to hear, what to notice. You will become my eyes in the halls where kings are not supposed to listen." Elara's stomach tightened. "I'm only a maid," she whispered. Adrian's gaze held hers, and in that moment she saw something beneath the predator, an exhausted ruler carrying a kingdom alone. "No," he said quietly. "You are the only one who told me the truth." Over the next days, Adrian moved like a man playing 2 games at once. In public, he treated Malric with familiar trust, granting him more authority over guards, and inviting the council to final preparations for the ritual. In private, he trained Elara gently but intensely, teaching her how vampires hide messages inside polite conversation, how servants are ignored, and how ignored people can become powerful without anyone noticing. Elara started to stand a little straighter, not because she suddenly felt brave, but because Adrian never mocked her for being human. He corrected her mistakes without cruelty. When she flinched at loud voices, he did not demand toughness. He simply lowered his tone until she could breathe again. It wasn't romance yet, not even close, but it was the first crack in the wall between monster and girl. Then, late one night, Elara carried fresh linens to the east wing and overheard Malric speaking to a hooded stranger in the corridor. The stranger's voice sounded like dry ash sliding over stone, and when Elara tried to step back quietly, her foot brushed a candle stand. The metal clinked. Malric's head snapped toward the sound, and his eyes narrowed as if he had smelled her fear. Elara fled down the servants' stairwell, heart pounding, and ran straight to Adrian's study. She burst in, shaking, and whispered the warning before her courage died. "My king, they know there's a leak," she said. "And I think Malric isn't the leader." Adrian's expression went still, colder than the night outside. He walked to the window and stared at the moonlit towers like a man realizing the enemy was larger than he planned. "Then the ritual is not just a trap," he murmured. "It's a signal." He turned back to Elara, and for the first time, his protective instinct showed openly. "From this moment," Adrian said, "you do not walk alone." Under a sky heavy with storm clouds, the kind that made the ancient castle feel more like a living creature than a home. After Elara's warning about the hooded stranger, King Adrian quietly doubled the night guard, but he did it in a way that made it look like routine preparation for the binding ritual. To the council, he appeared calm and unsuspecting, yet inside he was mapping every corridor, every betrayal, every possible outcome. Elara, meanwhile, was no longer treated as just another servant, at least not in private. Adrian had assigned her discreet access to restricted areas under the pretense of ritual service training. He personally showed her hidden passages, carved centuries ago for royal escape and war strategy. Walking beside him through torch-lit tunnels, Elara felt the strange shift in their dynamic. He was still terrifying tall, pale, radiating ancient power, but he also slowed his stride when she struggled to keep up, and he explained things instead of commanding blindly. That quiet consideration planted a warmth she tried hard to ignore. She reminded herself he was a vampire king, and she was only human. But emotional lines rarely obey logic. The following evening, the castle hosted a pre-ritual council banquet, a formal gathering meant to display unity before the sacred ceremony. Nobles dressed in crimson silk, crystal chandeliers burned with blue flame, and ancient music echoed across the obsidian hall. Elara served wine among creatures who could end her life with a glance. Yet she remembered Adrian's instructions. Watch hands, not faces. Listen to silence, not speeches. As she approached Lord Malric's table, she noticed him exchange a sealed black ring with another council elder. The gesture was subtle, but vampires valued symbolism, and black rings represented blood pacts forged outside royal law. Elara's pulse quickened. She moved away quietly, memorizing every detail. But as she turned, she felt a cold grip seize her wrist. Malric's eyes locked onto hers, sharp and suspicious. "You walk these halls too boldly for a human maid," he said softly. Fear crawled up her spine, but before she could respond, Adrian's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Release her." The entire hall fell silent. Malric bowed instantly, masking irritation, but Adrian's gaze lingered long enough to send a clear message. She was under royal protection. That single public defense ignited whispers across the court. Why would the king shield a human servant? Later that night, Adrian summoned Elara to the balcony, overlooking the storm-lashed valley. Rain misted the air, silver under moonlight. He asked what she had seen, and she told him everything: the ring, the elder, the tension. Adrian listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "You observe like a strategist," he said quietly. "Most nobles see only status. You see intent." Elara lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond to praise that felt so personal. After a moment, she asked the question she had been afraid to voice. "If the ritual is a trap, why not cancel it?" Adrian looked out over his kingdom, torches flickering far below. "Because if I cancel it, they strike openly. Thousands will die in the civil war that follows. If I attend, I control the battlefield." He paused, then added more softly, "And now I do not stand alone." The words settled between them heavier than the storm clouds. It wasn't a confession of affection, but it was trust-rare, powerful, and deeply intimate in its own way. Their conversation was cut short when a thunderous explosion shook the lower castle. Alarm bells rang instantly. Adrian's protective instincts surged, and he moved faster than human sight, pulling Elara against him as he raced down spiral staircases toward the impact site. When they reached the underground relic vaults, the iron doors had been torn open from the inside. Guards lay unconscious, not dead, but drained of strength. Inside the vault, a containment coffin carved with ancient runes stood shattered. The air smelled of rot and volcanic ash. Adrian's expression darkened in a way Elara had never seen before, not anger, but recognition. "This was sealed before my reign," he murmured. "A relic too dangerous to destroy." Elara stepped closer despite her fear. What was inside? Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at claw marks etched into stone walls thick enough to withstand war cannons. Finally he spoke, voice low. An ancient, older than the royal bloodline itself. As if summoned by his words, a deep, wet growl echoed from the tunnel beyond the vault, vibrating through the floor like a distant earthquake. The torches flickered violently, then died, plunging the corridor into darkness. Instinctively, Elara reached for Adrian's arm, and he didn't pull away. His hand covered hers, briefly steadying, protective. "Stay behind me," he ordered, but his tone carried concern rather than command. From the shadows, a towering silhouette began to move, eyes glowing pale like dying stars. Adrian's fangs descended slowly as he stepped forward to shield her. The conspiracy against the throne had just evolved into something far more catastrophic, and the ritual night was now only hours away, asterisk in total darkness beneath the castle. The kind of darkness that felt alive, pressing against skin and bone. The shattered vault behind them still smoked with ancient energy, and the low growl echoing through the tunnel made Elara's heart pound so loudly she feared the creature could hear it. King Adrian stepped forward, placing himself fully between her and the approaching shadow, his posture shifting from royal composure to pure predatory readiness. His crimson eyes glowed like embers in the void, fangs bared, every muscle coiled for combat. When the creature finally emerged into the faint emergency torchlight, Elara struggled not to scream. It was humanoid, but distorted by centuries of decay and power, its skin gray like cracked stone, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface, and its eyes were hollow pits burning with ancient hunger. Chains of enchanted silver still hung from one wrist where it had torn itself free. Adrian's voice dropped into a tone she had never heard before, older than language, heavy with ancestral authority. "You should have remained sealed, Ancient." The creature tilted its head slowly, stunning him like prey. When it spoke, its voice sounded like gravel grinding in a tomb. "Little king, your bloodline has grown thin." The creature lunged without warning, moving with terrifying speed despite its massive frame. Adrian met the charge head-on, the collision cracking stone beneath their feet. The force of their clash sent a shockwave down the tunnel, knocking Ilara against the wall. She watched in stunned horror as two immortal predators fought inches from her, claws against claws, strength against ancient brutality. Adrian was faster, more tactical, striking pressure points, slashing tendons, but the ancient absorbed damage like a mountain absorbing rain. It backhanded Adrian across the chamber, sending him crashing through a pillar. Dust filled the air. Ilara's breath caught fear not for herself, but for him. She had seen his power, yet this enemy felt older, heavier, like a relic of a darker era. The ancient turned toward her slowly, sensing weaker prey. Soft blood, it rasped, stepping closer. Ilara's legs trembled, but she didn't run. She remembered the king's lessons. Fear is natural. Surrender is a choice. She grabbed a fallen silver chain from the floor, just as the creature reached for her throat. Before it could touch her, Adrian reappeared in a blur, tackling the ancient away from her with feral fury. This time, there was no royal restraint, only rage. "You do not touch what is under my protection," he snarled. The possessive force behind those words stunned Ilara more than the battle itself. The fight escalated violently, tearing through the vault corridor and into an underground weapons chamber. Adrian knew he could not overpower the ancient through strength alone. He needed terrain, weapons, strategy. He maneuvered the creature toward a wall lined with relic armaments blessed by forgotten orders. Ilara followed at a distance, heart racing, trying to be useful rather than frozen. When Adrian shouted, "The lever, pull it," she reacted instantly, yanking a rusted iron handle beside the wall. Hidden panels slid open, releasing ultraviolet flood lamps designed to replicate concentrated sunlight. The chamber exploded in blinding white radiance. The ancient shrieked as its skin began to blister and smoke, staggering back, temporarily weakened. Adrian seized the moment, grabbing a consecrated spear from the wall and driving it through the creature's torso, pinning it against stone. The ancient roared in agony, but even impaled, it didn't die. It laughed, a horrifying sound echoing through the vault. "You fight well, child king, but I am not your true enemy." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Who released you?" The creature's cracked lips curled. "The hooded one. He feeds on kings." Before Adrian could demand more, the spear began melting under the ancient's heat, the creature slowly freeing itself. Time was running out. Adrian grabbed Ilara's arm and pulled her back. "We cannot kill it down here, not without destroying half the castle." He triggered a containment rune that collapsed a reinforced barrier between corridors, sealing the ancient temporarily behind enchanted steel. Its roars shook the walls, but it was trapped for now. Breathing heavily, Adrian led Ilara back toward the upper levels through emergency passages. She noticed blood on his sleeve, dark, ancient, but healing slowly. Without thinking, she tore a strip from her apron and pressed it gently against the wound. Adrian stilled at the contact, surprised by the softness of the gesture. "You're injured because of me," she whispered. "Because of the kingdom." He corrected quietly, though he didn't move away from her touch. For a moment, the chaos faded, replaced by an intimate stillness neither expected. But reality returned quickly. The ritual would begin within the hour. The council was already gathering, and somewhere in the castle, the hooded mastermind watched everything unfold. Adrian straightened, composure returning, yet his voice softened when he spoke to her. "You saved my life again tonight." Ilara shook her head. "You saved mine first." He held her gaze a second longer than necessary before turning toward the ritual hall. "Stay close to me during the ceremony," he said. "Whatever happens, do not lose courage." As they stepped into the torchlit corridors leading to the throne chamber, the castle bells began tolling, signaling the binding ritual had begun and the trap was about to close on everyone inside. Asterisk, with the tolling of the ritual bells echoing through the grand throne chamber, each deep chime vibrating against the ancient stone walls like a countdown to destiny. The hall was illuminated by towering black candles whose flames burned blue instead of gold, casting long shadows over the gathered vampire nobles. The air smelled of incense and iron. At the center of the chamber stood the ceremonial altar carved from obsidian, and upon it rested the silver binding chalice. King Adrian entered first, dressed in formal midnight armor embroidered with his royal crest, every step measured, controlled, unreadable. Alara followed several paces behind, wearing a simple but elegant dark gown instead of her maid uniform. Though whispers rippled through the nobles when they noticed her presence near the altar, human, in a ritual reserved for immortals. The council members watched carefully, their expressions smooth masks of loyalty, but Adrian sensed tension vibrating beneath their stillness. Somewhere among them stood the hooded mastermind who had released the ancient below the castle. As tradition required, Lord Malric approached the altar to present the chalice to his king. His movements were precise, respectful, almost rehearsed. Alara stepped forward at the same time, as instructed, to receive the goblet before passing it to Adrian. For a moment, their fingers brushed the cool silver together. Adrian's gaze flickered toward her, subtle but deliberate. Trust the signal. Alara lifted the chalice carefully, pretending to adjust its position as she recalled every detail Adrian had taught her. The faint scent rising from the liquid was wrong. Beneath the iron-rich aroma of ceremonial blood, she detected something bitter and sharp. Not ashroot, this time something stronger. The trap had evolved. Before she could react openly, a sudden tremor shook the chamber. The heavy doors slammed shut behind the nobles, sealing the hall. Gasps spread through the crowd as torches flickered violently. From the balcony above the throne, a hooded figure stepped forward slowly, his face hidden beneath deep shadows. His voice carried effortlessly through the chamber, cold and commanding. "You have grown complacent, King Adrian." Murmurs erupted among the council. Adrian did not turn immediately. Instead, he calmly removed his gauntlet and rested his hand near the hilt of his sword. "Show yourself," he ordered evenly. The hooded figure laughed softly. "I am merely the judge of strength." At that word, several elders exchanged nervous glances. The judge, the highest authority among the vampire council, was meant to enforce law, not stage rebellion. The hood fell back slightly, revealing pale skin etched with ancient symbols far older than Adrian's lineage. "Your reign has been tested," the judge continued. "By betrayal, by fear, by release of the ancient." Gasps echoed. Even Malric's confidence faltered. Ilara's heart pounded as realization struck. This was never just a coup for power. It was an examination. The judge had orchestrated the conspiracy to see if Adrian was worthy to rule. The ancient below had been a final trial. Adrian finally turned to face him fully. "You endangered my kingdom," he said quietly, but his voice carried lethal promise. "You endangered innocent lives." The judge's expression remained cold. "A weak king sacrifices thousands. A strong king sacrifices none." At that precise moment, the chamber shook again far more violently than before. A deafening roar thundered from beneath the floor. The ancient had broken through the containment barrier. Stone cracked as claws tore upward from the lower vault. Panic erupted among the nobles, several scrambling backward in fear. The judge's eyes widened slightly. This outcome had not been part of his design. "You miscalculated," Adrian said coldly. The ancient burst through the marble flooring in a shower of debris, larger and more enraged than before, its wounds already partially healed. Nobles screamed as guards rushed forward, only to be thrown aside effortlessly. Chaos filled the throne room. Without hesitation, Adrian stepped in front of Alara again, blade drawn, his power flaring visibly. "Stay behind me," he commanded, but Alara did not retreat far. Instead, she grabbed a fallen ceremonial dagger, blessed with silver runes. When the ancient lunged toward the nearest fleeing noble, Alara moved instinctively, shouting to draw its attention. The creature turned toward her instead. Adrian's eyes burned with fury as he intercepted the attack, but in that split second of distraction, Alara drove the rune dagger into the creature's exposed side where the earlier spear wound had weakened it. The ancient howled, staggering backward, destabilized long enough for Adrian to unleash the full force of his bloodline power in a concentrated strike that shattered its core from within. The creature disintegrated into ash across the ritual floor. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of dying candles. Smoke drifted through the ruined chamber. Adrian stood at the center, breathing heavily, armor cracked but victorious. He looked toward Alara, who stood trembling yet unbroken. The nobles stared at her with stunned respect. A human had stood in battle beside the vampire king. The judge slowly descended from the balcony, surveying the destruction. After a long pause, he bowed his head slightly, not to Adrian alone, but to both of them. "The throne remains yours," he declared solemnly. Adrian sheathed his sword and stepped toward Alara, lifting her gently to her feet. His voice softened enough that only she could hear. "You were never meant to be a servant." Around them, the council knelt in acknowledgement of their king. But Adrian's attention remained fixed on the human girl who had defied fear twice in one night, and in doing so, had changed the balance of the kingdom forever. 3 days after the destruction of the ancient, when calm finally returned to Black Hollow Castle, though the atmosphere had changed forever. The shattered throne chamber had been restored, the marble floors replaced, the broken pillars reforged with enchanted stone, yet no one could erase what the nobles had witnessed that night. Word had spread beyond the kingdom that a human girl had stood beside the vampire king in battle and survived. Some elders viewed it as a scandal, others as prophecy, but none dared challenge Adrian openly after he had defeated both Betrayal and an ancient terror within the same night. The council convened one final time in the restored hall, this time not to test him, but to formalize what had already become truth. The judge, now stripped of secrecy, declared that Adrian had proven not only strength, but restraint, compassion, and the ability to protect both vampire and human realms without plunging the kingdom into civil war. The throne was his without contest. Yet as the assembly ended and nobles departed in respectful silence, Adrian remained seated, his gaze not on the crown beside him, but on the human girl standing near the columns. Unsure whether she still belonged in the room at all, Alara had returned to servant duties, temporarily because she did not know what else she was allowed to be. She wore her simple uniform again, though now the other maids bowed slightly when passing her, no longer daring to mock the girl the king himself protected. Still, she felt out of place in both worlds, not fully servant, not noble, not safe in either identity. That evening, she was summoned to the royal terrace overlooking the moonlit valley where cold winds carried the scent of night roses. Adrian stood there waiting, dressed not in armor, but in formal black attire, the crown absent from his head as if he wished to meet her, not as ruler, but as a man. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them held memories of battle, trust, and shared survival. Finally Adrian turned, his expression unreadable, but softer than she had ever seen. "You saved my kingdom," he said plainly. Alara shook her head immediately. "I only did what anyone would do." Adrian stepped closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "No," he corrected quietly. "You did what nobles, generals, and immortals failed to do, You chose courage when fear would have been easier. He reached into his coat and removed a small velvet case. Ilara's breath caught, though she did not assume romance. When he opened it, there was no ring, but a silver crest shaped like a crescent wing wrapped around a sapphire flame, the royal insignia of the king's inner council, a rank granted only to those he trusted with governance itself. Ilara stared in disbelief. My king, I cannot accept this. I am human. Adrian's gaze did not waver. That is precisely why you must. This kingdom has been ruled by immortals for centuries, and it nearly fell because we forgot humility, compassion, and the value of fragile lives. You remind me of what power is meant to protect. He stepped closer and pinned the crest gently to her dress. His fingers brushed her collarbone briefly, sending a quiet tremor through her that had nothing to do with fear. I do not want a servant beside me, he said softly. I want a partner who will speak truth, even if it means telling a king to stay silent. Emotion welled in Ilara's eyes as she realized the distance between their worlds had not disappeared. But Adrian was building a bridge across it rather than demanding she climb alone. She took a slow breath, gathering courage not for battle this time, but for something far more personal. If I stand beside you, she said quietly, it will not be as someone who fears you, but as someone who believes in the man beneath the crown. Adrian's expression shifted surprise first, then something warmer, older, and deeply guarded finally opening. He extended his hand, not as a command, but as an invitation. Ilara hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. The contact was cool, yet grounding, steady, protective. He drew her gently beside him at the terrace edge, where the kingdom lights flickered like constellations below. The council will challenge this, he admitted. They will question a human at my side. Ilara gave a small, steady nod. Then we will prove them wrong together. A quiet smile touched Adrian's lips, rare and genuine. He turned slightly, lowering his voice near her ear. You have already changed this kingdom, Ilara, and you have changed me. The words lingered between them like a vow unspoken, yet deeply understood. As dawn's first silver light crept over the mountains, signaling a new era for the vampire realm, Adrian raised her hand formally before the rising sun, not as a servant, not as prey, but as the woman who had stood fearless beside the throne. And from that night forward, the kingdom remembered one truth above all others. Power may command fear, but courage earns a crown no bloodline alone can claim.